So we did our version 1 of Just Good Football Players a few weeks ago on the podcast. And I'll quickly recap the guys that you had, and then I'll go over your updated version, your 2.0 version of guys that you like post-Senior Bowl. And your initial list, and this is before we got to the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama back in late January, early February, and the guy that you are still deeply in love with, I would imagine, John Michael Schmitz, the center out of Minnesota. You're crushing them hard, as the kids say. And
yep,
he had
just confirmed what I saw on tape during the fall.
Yeah, he had a good week for sure, no doubt about it. Deion Henry, the linebacker out of Washington State, undersized historically, but not necessarily in today's NFL. When you look at off-ball linebackers, extremely explosive. I think he's going to be 24, 25, but you don't care about that, right?
No, he's athletic. He can run, and he's what do you want to refer to as a modern-day NFL linebacker that can play all 3 downs.
And Thomas Nkum, the defensive end out of Central Michigan, also had a pretty good week in Mobile. Not a small school guy, but not a Power 5 guy. And he had a good fall as well. And then, do you want to try to say our guy from Northwestern's name, or do you want me to say it?
I have it. I've been practicing it. Now, you can correct me since you're the wordsmith on the show, and I'm just here to be a pretty face next to yours.
Yeah, double yikes. So this is your first in the list of 3 guys in your Just Good Football Players 2.0 version. Who you got?
Adetomiwa Adebawore.
I'll give you B+ for that. That's good.
Well, no, it's an A- because I practiced it for 3 weeks since I've. But no, and
hey, let me ask you this first. Sorry to interrupt you, Rick. Let me ask you this first. Did you practice names of the players you had to call on draft night if they had names that you weren't used to saying?
I didn't have to announce them. Someone else.
No, but when you called the phone to say we're going to draft you.
Yeah, no, everybody would make sure that I was. The one thing is to make sure you tell them what the heck his name is and make sure you pronounce it correctly.
So that was probably your biggest fear on draft night, not getting the right player, but getting the player's name right.
Just making sure you don't embarrass the player on the phone when you're talking to him. So,
all right, go ahead. Tell me about Tommy. He goes by Tommy, by the way.
Yeah, and I really liked him. I went back I did 21 tape on him, and this was one of the first guys I did this fall. I watched him against Nebraska when they played over in Ireland, and he reminded me a little bit of, and again, you can rip my comparisons because that's what we're supposedly you're paid to do. Me, I don't get paid, so I'm just making comparisons myself.
Here we go.
But he reminded me of Boogie Basham a little bit, who Buffalo took a couple years ago out of Wake Forest. He's a shorter defensive end that's very explosive, very powerful. I think he has some ability to be an inside pass rusher. He went down to the Senior Bowl. They played him some base end, but then they slid him inside. And you can see that explosiveness. You can see the strength. You can see him work through edges of the blockers, and I thought he really helped himself when he showed down at the Senior Bowl that he can be a potential excellent inside pass rusher.
Yeah, so Tommy Adebawore, he is he's at least listed as defensive lineman at Northwestern. You mentioned that Nebraska game to start the season off in Ireland. Had a good game there and continued to have a good game throughout the season. At the Senior Bowl, he was measured in at 6'1.5", 284, 34-inch arms. And he's a little short, but he's also low center of gravity. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, I would imagine, right?
No, Adebawore is how you pronounce his last name.
Okay, thank you. Played a lot of 5 technique, lined up over the tight end at times, and sometimes some 3 techniques. So at 290 or 284, what are you thinking about Adebawore when you see him? Is that a guy you're gonna move inside? You gonna leave him outside? What's your plan with him if you draft him?
I think you know if he had to play some base defensive end, I don't think that if he's going to hold up as a 3 technique or a defensive tackle because he's that short. But he does have exceptional quickness. I think he's an explosiveness, but he's going to have problems when he has to take on double teams, hold the point versus combos versus NFL caliber offensive linemen. But in nickel situations, when he can potentially get in one-on-one situations with a guard, I think he'll be a mismatch and have a big impact in some kind of role, especially in his rookie year.
So I had him as a day 2 guy before the Senior Bowl, and I feel quite comfortable with him as a day 2 guy now. Any issues with the measurables at all?
No, because of the 34-inch arm length.
Right.
That makes up for the 6'1" or whatever he measured at. When you have that long of arms, that increases his height based on his wingspan. So that really helped him when he came in and his arm length was that long.
All right, you get on me all the time.
Hopefully his college partner, Skoronski, will have I don't know if they'll be 34-inch arms, but I'm praying that he has longer than 32-inch arms.
Sometimes people pay to, ask Santa Claus for a pony or a new bicycle. You're praying for Peter Skoronski to have 34-inch arms. That's all you want.
No, he's not going to have 34-inch arms. I'm not going to pray that you'll never get that prayer answered.
Not with that attitude.
Closer to 33 than they are to 32, or maybe a hair over 33, I'd be extremely excited about.
So, it's funny you mentioned that. I would imagine there's no way to cheat that, but a lot of times guys can cheat the hand measurement by the way they sort of splay their hand out or they can do a little finagling to get over if you're
Not
quarterback.
really, but I want to hear how you can finagle a hand measurement when you make it.
Explain to me how guys' hands at the Senior Bowl
Okay, you put it like that,
combine.
and then it's because of the human measuring the arm and the human measuring the hand. It's not all of a sudden it doesn't get shorter or smaller, except if a guy has a deformed finger or something like that. But for the most part, when there's inconsistencies in arm length and sometimes hand size, it may have to do with the person who is actually doing the measurements.
By the way, you probably know this because you were in the business for a minute, as the kids say. Jeffrey Okudah, one hand is smaller than the other. And he told us at the combine a few years ago that they measured the wrong hand. He has like a deformed pinky, I think, something like that. So his one hand measured 8 and change, and he's like, no, you got to measure the other hand. I can't go around telling people I have 8-inch hands.
Then he'd be on podcasts with us.
Yeah, I measured my hand next to Danny Cannell's once. Danny Cannell's 6'5", an NFL former quarterback. He laughed out loud in my face at the size of my hand. Something that you would probably do too, Rick.
I would never laugh at you, Ryan. I have the utmost respect for you, not your measurements, but
mentally, not
the job
physically.
You have to do for CBS.
Speaking of little guys, and you'll be shocked to learn that another little guy made my just good football players list. To recap quickly, my guys from the version 1.0 was Kalijah Cansey, undersized defensive lineman, Tommy Eichenberg, sort of a hard-nosed old school linebacker, and then, of course, my guy, Sidney Brown, the safety out of Illinois. He was, in fact, undersized. But I will tell you this, Debo, some guy named Rick Spielman came around on Sidney Brown, safety at Illinois, at the Senior Bowl based on the way he played and practiced. So just giving, I got to give a voice to the little people, Rick, because you will not. So
I came around a little. It's
you liked him,
but it fits in all, because if you look at your list, okay, Cansey, tiny.
Yep.
Eichenberg, is he still coming out, or did he go back? He's coming out.
I'll double check.
Okay, and Sidney Brown, tiny. And now I'm not even going to steal your thunder, because I didn't think there couldn't be anyone smaller than those two guys, Brown and Cansey. And you did find one that's actually smaller than them, which is with quite a feat.
Quite a feat indeed. He plays on the same team as one of my favorite players, who is huge and incidentally you don't like, Julian Brents.
I did not say I don't like him. I just said that he had some issues versus Quentin Johnson, and he did kind of grow on me a little bit. I will give you credit at the Senior Bowl, where I didn't see it in person, or when I was at the Sugar Bowl, or when I watched tape on him. I just thought, and you're talking about Julius Brents, I'm assuming.
Yeah, my guy, 6'4", all day long. Debo does inform me, you are right, Rick. Once again, Eichenberg is returning to Ohio State, so that's good for him, good for that defense, and good for his
just trying to help the show out. I think if we can get a little bit accurate on the guys actually coming out that we can talk about, that'll help the podcast tremendously.
All right. Well, here's one guy that's coming out who I haven't seen his measurements yet, but the web
you can't see them; they're so small.
Well, here's the thing: like he's probably not in a hurry to get measured, and the school website has him at 5'6", 176. I'm talking about Deuce Vaughn, the running back out of Kansas State. And as you know, the school website typically overestimates the size and weight of their players, and I get it. You're selling a product. Deuce Vaughn is incredibly fun to watch. Also,
I'll give you that.
You tell me who at 5'6", he's a tough runner. He does all the dirty things you want him to do. He plays much bigger than he is, all the sort of cliches we use. But explain to me what role a 5'6", 176-pound running back has in the NFL, if any. Like where?
Oh, boy. That one's a little hard. Why don't you explain to me and the rest of our fans on what that means?
So here's the thing. He has some kick return ability. He didn't do a ton of it. Had 7 kicks as a freshman. And didn't return kicks the last 2 seasons, so he wasn't used there. So he doesn't add anything. You're not going to use him on special teams on coverage, I would imagine, right? I mean,
no.
Right, he's too tiny. So he has to be a running back 3, and he has to be truly special to make the roster as running back 3. So that's why I had him as probably like just a flyer late in the 7th round, or he's going to get undrafted, because you have to do more than one thing if you're not a starter. And he right now does one thing well on the college level, but it probably doesn't translate. All that said, I think he's a really good football player, and he was important to that Kansas State offense, and it may not translate to the next level. And there are players like that every year, but I wanted to give him a little shout out for his performance over the course of the season. But you will not get any pushback from me that I think he should be a top 100 player, because that's not going to happen.
Well, if you have that much belief in this kid, in this young man, would you say he's Darren Sproles?
No. What's
the difference between him and Darren Sproles?
Darren Sproles offered kick return ability, and he was a little bigger.
Well, I don't know the difference between 5'5" and 5'4" and 5'5.5". So.
An inch. I think he was thicker. I'll double check, but I think he was thicker too. But but he was still a day 3 guy, and he was a projection, right?
Yep.
And how many Darren Sproles have come along, also incidentally out of Kansas State, have come along between Deuce Vaughn and the original Darren Sproles and been good? So he was 5'6", 187. So at least 11 pounds heavier at the same size. He ran a 4.47 at the combine back in 2005, I believe. Yeah. And he was a day 3 guy. And look, he was special.
You know what I'm going to do? Just because I was down at the Sugar Bowl, and I was in shock, because he fits in the good football player category. There's no question about that. And he had an explosive run against Alabama too. And he has very good vision and foot quickness, and you can't see him because he's 5'2". But he is a good football player. But I took a picture of him just because I couldn't believe how small he looked compared to everybody else on the field. And if I can find that picture, we'll post it on my Twitter, just so everybody can see what we're actually talking about.
Yeah, hopefully he's not standing next to Julius Brents, because I would not do him any favors. That's nearly.
I did have him just to prove a point.
That's 10 inches shorter.
Yeah, but I think I had him standing in a huddle, and I couldn't see him in a huddle. I thought they had 10 men on the field. In fact, the official pulled up his flag off because he was going to throw for 10 men in the huddle. So we seen this little guy come running out from underneath the. No, I'm just kidding.
I was going to say that would be remarkable. All right, here we go. Let's go. So that's my guy. Let's go back to one of your guys. This guy's a different body frame for sure. Will McDonald, edge rusher. You have him as DPR. Out of Iowa State. Also, I thought flash at times in the Senior Bowl, wasn't solid from start to finish, but he's a guy that needs to add weight. But there are a lot of things to like about him.
Yeah, I think he weighed in, if I'm not mistaken, at 241.
Yep.
So he was bigger than I thought he was going to be. He plays extremely hard on the tape. Where his issue is I think he's a athlete that is best moving forward as a pass rusher. I don't think he's a great athlete when you have him drop in coverage. I do think he has some natural speed and ability to bend through edges as an edge rusher. He needs to get stronger at the point versus the run, but I really loved his motor and his effort, and I thought he helped himself when he showed up down at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, so here's the thing. 6'3.5", 241 at the Senior Bowl, 35-inch arms. So that gets your attention.
He's going to go especially if he runs.
Right. I had him middle of the second round coming into the Senior Bowl, just based on him being.
Oh, that's not bad. That's actually that's very good. I'm quite excited about that projection. I'm glad you changed it after we talked about it off air.
Right. Make a note, Debo. He agrees. All right, so that's your second guy. My second guy didn't get a combine invite. We talked about him last week, Rick. Bowling Green's own Carl Brooks, edge rusher in your scorebooks. The reality is he's enormous. He was 6'3", 300 at the combine, 32.5-inch arms, and they lined him up at Bowling Green. He played half of the snaps were at 5 to 7 techniques, so playing outside the tackle or wider. And he did very little reduced, as you like to say, over the tackle or even inside of that. So I don't know why he didn't get a combine invite. We talked about that, but I think he's an absolute bull in a china shop, and I think that he can add some versatility. Now, you're not going to use him outside to pass rush solely at 300 pounds, but I think you talk about on the offensive line, the position flexibility, but his ability to move up and down the line has to be intriguing.
The one thing that, and I believe, was their game, UCLA was the first game of the season where they, and so I was like watching that tape, and then I see this kid, and I've seen this like kind of doesn't look like a defensive end. He's a little thicker.
Yeah.
But they were playing him from a 2-point stance in some of the tape I watched. So I thought he played with some motor. I thought he played with some energy. He did not back down from UCLA at all. In fact, he made some plays that kind of caught your attention. But everyone knows with that arm length and with that weight and that short that you're going to have to probably project him inside, because I don't think he's going to be a natural edge rusher, although he does show position flexibility. The thing that really intrigued me about him even more is when we got down to the Senior Bowl, they did slide him inside as a 3 technique, an under tackle, even putting him some, if I believe, over the center in some one-on-one situations. And you can see this guy move, and he has some quickness to him. He has some pass rush, although he is a little raw. But that is a big transition when you slide someone inside, because all of a sudden you don't have as big of an area and not as much space to work in as you do if you're an edge rusher. And he seemed to adapt and got better and better each day down there at practice.
Right, and that's something that teams will certainly take into consideration. All right, I'm gonna throw this comp out here. You can do with it what you want. So I just checked the numbers to make sure he's pretty close to LJ Collier, who was a surprise. I don't know if you thought he was a surprising first-round pick back when the Seahawks took him back in 2019, but
yes.
LJ measured 6'2.5", 283. He did have 34-inch arms. I think that Carl Brooks is a better player than LJ Collier.
Yeah, and Collier, I don't think had a stellar NFL career. But he did show up when he was down at TCU, and everybody projected him to be a little bit of an inside pass rusher. I can see that a little bit, but I think this kid, I really liked his motor and the energy that he played with. I thought he played hard. And usually if you get guys that can play hard and you don't have to coach that, then they'll develop the rest of the technique and the rest of everything that goes into making these guys good football players.
All right, next on the good football player list, your number 3 guy, Steve Avila, who played on the interior offensive line, mostly guard at TCU. He flashed throughout the season. Huge body, 6'3", 332 at the Senior Bowl. His measurements, 32.5-inch arms, just a hair longer than that. That gets your attention in terms of him staying inside. I think he took some snaps at center as well. I can't remember at the Senior Bowl.
Yes, he did.
So tell me about Steve Avila.
I just loved his position flexibility. I don't think he is a great athlete out in space, although he does play on his feet. Rarely do you see him on the ground. But I think with that size, he's an inline mauler that plays hard. He tries to finish. I thought he was very good in pass protection in the one-on-one drills down there. Tough to bull rush him or have a defender go through him, and he does not get collapsed into the pocket or into the quarterback's lap. I saw him down there at center, and he did some one-on-one drills and some drills at center as well, which gives him huge position flexibility. I think this guy has a legitimate chance to be a day one starter as a rookie, and I thought that was verified after we saw what he did down at the Senior Bowl.
So I had him as a sort of a third-round guy before the Senior Bowl, and that may change after we get done with the combine. But going into the Senior Bowl, I liked his tape as a day 2 guy. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I don't think he's a day 1 guy by far, but I think when you're trying to find, because it's not a great offensive center class, and when you have some of these big guys that are athletic enough to play both guard and center, that I think that is going to push them up the board a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, let's go to my last just good football player. Another guy, Rick, didn't get a combine invite. We talked about him last week as well. Marty Mapu, we saw him one day at practice, Sacramento State at the Senior Bowl, safety out of Sacramento State, but they had him playing doing more linebacker drills, and he looked as comfortable as if he'd been playing linebacker his entire life. They lined him up all over the place at Sacramento State. He played in the slot. He played over the tackle. He sort of played that lurker robber position. And sometimes they lined him up as a 7 technique. Sometimes he did line up in an off-ball position. So he was sort of a jack of all trades and master of a lot of those trades, if you will. He measured 6'2.5", 217, 33.5-inch arms. If you care about such things for linebacker / safety hybrid, I like the fact that he played with his hair on fire. I like the fact that he came downhill with purpose and wouldn't be afraid to punch in the mouth in terms of the fall tape. And it was very aggressive. In the one practice we saw him, he has the ability to cover guys in space, tight ends, and running backs. I like a lot about it. And I was sort of surprised he didn't get a combine invite.
Yeah, and I don't know. I didn't get an opportunity to go back and watch his Sac State tape yet, but I'm anxious to go back and look at him. But he did show up down at the Senior Bowl. I don't know if he looked like he's been playing linebacker since he's been born. I think there's a little bit of adjustment there for him, especially if he's going to have to take on blocks in line and learn how to use his hands. So we're over exaggerating just a hair there.
Let me ask you this: he's 213, so you can't play off ball at 213 anyway, right?
As a safety?
No, I mean if
he can play stack linebacker if he continues to grow. But what I think this kid is like Neal, kind of who was a hybrid strong safety. Has bounced around the league a little bit. That came out of Florida a few years ago. Dan Quinn converted him to linebacker, so he's like a will linebacker. A lot of these guys potentially can be dime linebackers, and what I mean by that, you have your nickel package with your two corners and your DB that's covering the slot receiver. But a lot of times they'll take a guy like this that has enough athletic skills to match up maybe in man coverage versus a tight end or versus a running back. So you refer to him as almost like a dime linebacker. I think it's going to take some time for him to adjust to that linebacker role. Where he's going to have to play to have the best chance to make an NFL roster. But where he's going to have the best chance is what he does on special teams, because I think this kid is a good football player, but he is going to be a little bit of a project. He's got a long ways to go on learning technique, especially on how to use his hands. But I do think he'll be an excellent special teamer. And usually guys that excel on special teams, their rookie year and even in their second year, a lot of those guys eventually end up being good football players at their position.
So Keanu Neal was 17th overall pick in 2016. That's who you're referring to earlier. And I will admit that I get excited about these young men and oversell them. I would be terrible in the draft room, because when the bill comes due and the guy ends up washing out of the league, I would be the first guy fired.